essentially someone is not fueling enough over a period of time to support the level of training that they're doing. And then what happens is then your body's systems start kind of like dimming the lights on the system so they don't function well or properly. And that can honestly look different in different athletes, which makes it difficult. The biggest thing is doing some of the sodium sweat testing, fluid loss testing. Biggest issue that I've found is people don't do that, and then they don't realize, that this imbalance in fluid electrolytes is actually what could be causing my nausea issues.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.
My guest today is Kylee Van Horn, who is a registered dietitian and owner of Fly Nutrition. She works with athletes of all types, whether they are looking to improve performance or seeking help in managing eating disorders. Kylee also recently launched her own podcast entitled Your Diet Sucks. I hope you enjoy this episode and learn a thing or two that can help fuel your performance. All right, Kylee, thanks for joining me today on the CoachCast. We're both in Colorado. You're down in Carbondale area, right?
Yeah, up in the mountains here, and it's been pretty hot this summer. So I'm looking for some cooler weather, which I think is coming this weekend.
I know. I'm already starting to think about ski prep. So I'm kind of looking forward to some coolness, so I'm right there with you. Tell us about, it's Fly Nutrition, right? That's your company?
Yeah, so I own Fly Nutrition. I work with skiers, runners, triathletes, cyclists, on their endurance sports performance nutrition. And I've been doing that since 2018. So feel lucky to be able to turn my own passion, lifelong runner, into a career option as well.
So, and tell us about what kind of, what's your customer type? What kind of athletes come to you? Sport types, but also kind of like what are issues they're seeking your advice on?
Yeah, so I would say probably 50% of the athletes that I'm working with are maybe struggling with red S or relative energy deficiency in sport. Or they might have an eating disorder history. And then the other 50% are working on performance nutrition. So that could be everything from just wanting to optimize to get the next edge in their training and racing goals, or even troubleshooting a lot of times with like fueling plans as well, especially for my Ironman athletes, my ultra endurance athletes. A lot of them, they want to have their fueling plan dialed, and then I always help them with like backup plans as well. If something goes wrong, what are you going to do in this situation? Yeah. So a lot of that kind of stuff too.
And what about sport types?
I kind of mentioned it at the beginning here, but like triathletes, runners, cyclists, skimo athletes. I have a big Nordic following, Nordic skiing. A lot of Nordic skiers from like the Tahoe area I work with. Yeah. So wide variety. Sometimes I gravitate more towards the like ultra running and longer Ironman athlete. Because my husband and I do ultra type events. And I think, just having that experience allows for me to relate to the athletes and really help them dial things in a little bit better too.
Absolutely. Well, I chase your husband a lot in the skimo races. I'm always looking from behind. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, you have really diverse, hot sports, cold sports, short sports like Nordic, all the way up to the ultra Ironman, obviously. So now when someone reaches out to you, what does that onboarding process look like? I've always wondered, are you doing the consultation, and then
how are you even finding out what they're eating? Are you asking them to keep a food log on paper or using an app, sending you photos? What does that kind of first week look like?
Yeah, so I do actually a pretty extensive intake process before I even start with an athlete. I have a lot of background, like videos and things for people to watch, and then an intake form where I ask questions that people sometimes are like, whoa, I've never been asked this sort of thing. Like, what motivates you? Maybe what kind of coaches you've jived with or maybe not jived with in the past. What things did you like about the coaching experience? What did you not like? Obviously, nutrition related things in the sense of, what things would you not want to give up? Because I think when people start working on their nutrition, they think that someone's going to say, oh, you have to cut out all of these foods and you are going to be miserable for the next 6 months or something.
Right.
But I try to make sure that we're taking a pretty balanced approach that can be, used long term, not some extreme, like really regimented a diet that might not be sustainable in the long term. So those kind of questions. And then I take a big look into supplements. Some of my athletes are taking 25. I've had people taking 25 different supplements when I get started with them. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to have to do a whole discussion just on supplements,
Right.
Asking about their fueling plan for races, as well as their health history and all that kind of stuff too, because as a registered dietitian, I can work with people in sport. And then if they have medical things that, we need to consider throughout, legally, I can work with them on those things too. So it's always important to kind of get that full history, injury history, and health history too.
Yeah.
And then in the first session, I actually don't have a lot of my athletes track ahead of time because, kind of like I said before, 50% of the people I work with might have a disordered relationship with food. And so in that first session, we're kind of determining what type of analysis or tracking do we want to do. So for my athletes that are maybe or could be triggered by numbers and detail, we might do more of a photo log and journaling experience. Whereas, some of my performance-based athletes that are very numbers detailed and data detailed, I actually use Chronometer a lot. I don't know if you've heard of that tracking system, but it's really great because they do a nice micronutrient breakdown as well as a macronutrient breakdown. So when I'm working with somebody, I always want to look at the macronutrients because I'm teaching people how to adapt their nutrition to their training, but also I want them to have that micronutrient density coming in too. Right. And so I like to do that from a food perspective first, and then see, maybe we need to close some gaps with supplementation. It depends on, blood work and where they're at with things, et cetera. And that's another thing. So all these different things I'm considering, like blood work is another thing. If somebody's had that done already, I can go over that with them, but sometimes I'll even advise people what to get, or I can put together a custom panel through like Quest Labs and get some markers read as an initial starting place. Yeah. So I like to do, pretty detailed initial first session so that we're setting that person up for a personalized experience. It's not like, here's a 10-page plan that everyone follows and, go follow these rules.
Yeah.
Which is more diety, like, general media, like social media type thing, I feel like.
Yeah.
And so I want that person to feel like everything we're doing, we're getting into the weeds and we are building a plan for them over time that's going to, I call it nutrition skill stacking. So over time, we're going to build this nutrition lifestyle that's going to support them in various aspects of their training and their training cycle and, whatever the challenges they're facing at that time too.
Yeah. Well, gosh, there's kind of like two camps, if you will, and oftentimes they might cross over, but you're trying to find the underlying issues, whether that be performance oriented or more of an eating disorder type of area. So let's first talk about more on the performance side of things. Are you in the consultation? Are you getting nuggets of like where some habits need to be changed? I mean, it's not just about what you choose, but maybe like underlying habits that have to change one by one that unlock these secrets. Is that even so it's almost like everybody needs a therapist, right?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, I've actually taken some courses, or like when we were in school to become a dietitian, I had to take some nutrition counseling courses because it is so psychology based as well, behavior change based.
Right.
And so I would say that's actually a huge difference between, just tracking on macros.com or getting a generalized plan and working one-on-one with someone. Because when you're working one-on-one with someone, you are actually diving into, what is preventing me from making these changes? Because a lot of people come to me all the time and are like, oh yeah, like I read online like all this stuff and I've tried to do it on my own, but I just like can't get it. I can't figure out how to do it myself. And so that's what, a sports dietitian is doing often, is helping that person figure out what are the biggest challenges that are preventing you from getting you to that next level. Sometimes it's overcomplication of things. Like people are just like in the details too much, and then they like can't figure out how to maintain that or sustain that.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And then on the other hand, like you're saying, like it can be a behavior change thing or a mindset thing that needs to shift. And having those conversations is a really important part of that process.
Yeah.
Like I'll have people talk to me about, so what was your history with, eating cereal as a kid, or like off limits for desserts or whatever, like having these. Yeah. So a lot of people grew up in a very rigid environment around food. And so they think that they have to be that way long term. But then when we have the convo, they're like, oh, actually, I could have some flexibility here. What would that look like? Yeah. So it is very, we dive a lot deeper into things. It's not just surface level education. I do education, but a lot of my time on calls I call that the coaching time, like the digging in the weeds time, like strategy time, where we're kind of having those hard conversations and figuring out what we can do to get that person to the next level.
Yeah, there's some misunderstandings, obviously, within the endurance world, if you will. And I think one, which you might be able to speak to, is this concept of like earning your food, and it feels like that's reverse of what it should be. Like you should be fueling for tomorrow, not earning tonight's splurge because I did a 5-hour run. Like this, well, it's kind of like in reverse of each other.
Yeah, and it's tough because there's still this idea for a lot of people that they want to lose weight or they don't want to gain weight. And so there's this idea of like, I must use exercise as the way to kind of maintain weight, lose weight. And I think that's oftentimes where that idea will come from too, because people are scared of body composition change or whatever from fueling more. But in reality, understanding that you need that fuel to actually adapt to your training stressors, that's where they don't understand that disconnect. And I think, that's where coaches, sport coaches can really help explain to athletes that, you need this fuel to be able to adapt to the things that you're doing if you want to get the most out of your training. Now, it's kind of a whole different ballgame if somebody is trying to go into weight loss, body comp change as a focus, but then that training needs to reflect that as well. You shouldn't be maybe focusing on that within 2 months of a big race that you're getting
Right.
ready for. So that's where those conversations need to occur with the coach and the athlete and the dietitian. I take a team medicine approach often.
Okay.
So I do work with a lot of coaches, back and forth just as to what I'm doing with the athlete, so that the coach has an understanding of, here's what we're working on right now. Here's how you can support your athlete in these nutrition goals as well. And then how is the training, is the training appropriate for what this athlete is trying to achieve at this time too?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
it is, it's not just, again, it's not just giving a plan. I really like to have that communication going on with whoever I'm working with, athlete, coach, doctor, PT, all that kind of stuff.
So on the performance side, what are some of the biggest issues you run into where you could make, big gains with an athlete, for example? What are the couple of the big takeaways that you see the most of the time?
Yeah. And I guess I'd say I have a good example of a coach actually that I was working with from CTS. And he wanted to he was pretty dialed, but he wanted to optimize and make sure he was covering all his bases on his nutrition. And some of the bigger things that we focused on were the amount of carbohydrate that he was consuming on different days of training was not varying that much. And so we actually worked on him strategizing timing of carbohydrate, what that looked like before a long run, even kind of like, I'm not saying everyone has to do this, but sometimes even a more meal by meal basis on carbohydrates, and then a day by day carbohydrate shift for people. And that was a big thing for him, as well as timing and type of carbohydrate consumption, like your simple and complex carbohydrates. When are you using those throughout the day? Nutrient density. So looking at consumption of fruits and vegetables and the variety in those, because sometimes people get really stuck on, I just have broccoli all week and then I don't have anything else, and so variance in diversity in food consumption. And then, getting into the other macronutrients, like even we worked on his omega-3 consumption to help with inflammation balancing. We worked on BCAA consumption, so branched chain amino acids. So like the quality of protein sources and when he was using certain protein types. And he was a plant-based athlete. So we actually chose, higher BCAA plant-based foods like post-workout. So there's so many different things that you can do and so many levels of things that you can do with different types of athletes. So I would say he was in that upper tier of people that were trying to get things all dialed in and to the next level. And then there's another camp of people that are I just need to improve my eating habits, and have no understanding. They literally they eat the same amount of food every day and they don't adjust their nutrition to that training day. So they're doing a 4-hour ride or something and they're still eating the same amount of food as if they did a 40-minute ride.
Okay.
And so that is a big cornerstone for a lot of people, that just having an understanding of how to do that is huge for them. They feel so much better.
Right.
So that's a big daily nutrition thing. And then with the fueling plan stuff, there's so much that we can do there too. I do a lot of fluid loss testing with people, sodium sweat testing, carbohydrate consumption during exercise, varying carb types, trying to figure out where that sweet spot is for people. Some people do better with pushing those carb limits a little bit per hour, but others actually do better with a little bit less carbohydrate. So, working on some of that stuff for people And they're essentially, when they're coming in, they might just be doing like, the general reps, like 200 calories an hour and 16 ounces of fluids an hour and 250 milligrams of sodium.
Yeah.
And then when we get into the details, they're like, oh, wow, this is cool. Like, we can actually do a lot more.
Yeah.
And I can feel even better and get more out of my training and recovery. So those are a few examples of big difference makers for people. And then it kind of varies the level of detail I get into with people, because everyone's starting from a different place,
Yeah. Well, going back to the carbohydrate, like variation day to day, we've been hearing a lot about this quote, like periodization of diet, right? But I think it's more about what you said. It's like preparing for what's coming up, obviously recovering, but not enough people think about preparing for tomorrow or preparing for today. I'm doing a 4-hour ride, not a 40-minute ride. Change my breakfast. So how might we think about the macronutrients? You centered on carbohydrate, but what about the role of protein and fat? How might we think about all three of them working in conjunction with each other? Is there any constant, or are all three changing them depending on what
all
you're
three
training?
Are changing.
Yeah.
So and that's something that I have had conversations with people about too. They're like, oh yeah, I knew the carbs changed, but I didn't think that protein would increase or, fat would increase. And so if you think about it, all of our macronutrients contain energy, contain calories. And when you're doing more training, you're burning more energy. So then we're trying to increase the amount of nutrition coming from protein, or the amount of energy coming from protein, carbohydrates, and fats overall. So, it's again, the tough part is like, how much detail can someone get into without not confusing themselves too much?
Yeah.
And then I also think it's, especially pre-exercise and things like that, it is a little bit more sports specific. Like some of my cyclists will do a little bit more protein and fat with carbohydrate before a big ride versus a runner that might be doing an ultra run. Their stomach might not be able to handle more protein and fat. And so those are the kind of conversations that we would have sport specific wise too, because there's going to be slight differences there. And I don't know if that's like fully on the same topic, but I did want to kind of point that out, that even within sports, there can be differences in what you're targeting, during exercise and pre-exercise, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, is it not true that cyclists can probably consume more per hour or maybe even more diverse forms of carbohydrate versus a runner, because there's not that jostling? So, how do we practice that, and where do you find the secrets, and do you work that into the training?
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll have that's the thing, is we'll have those conversations and I'll kind of get a sense of, where is someone starting from? Like, what is their baseline fueling plan? What issues, if any, have they experienced in the past? How are they feeling in their recovery? All of that kind of stuff. And then we kind of have the conversations about, how much somebody can handle on the bike, or like in triathlon, for instance, too, like bike versus run. There's some differences there. We're making the fueling plan. And then also we do have to consider logistics. So it's like some of my athletes are like, well, I don't want to carry a bunch of solid food on my bike. Like, I would rather just do gels and have more, high carb drink mix or something. So, it's also a logistics personal thing for a person too, in regards to like what they want to take and what they can handle on a training or racing setting.
Yeah. What about practicing that within training? Are you trying to get in at least 2 days a week of practicing your fuel plan, for example, for X number of weeks leading into an A race?
Yeah, I mean, I like to at least start the gut training for my athletes 2 months beforehand. So, when I'm working with somebody on, if they're trying to tweak their fueling plan for a race, which athletes should be doing, like it should be race specific, not necessarily, you just do one thing and that's it. I think it's
Right.
always a fluid. It should change a little bit depending on what you're racing. But so on that note, then if you're going to try out some new things, think about 3 months out. Maybe you test some things 3 to 4 months out that would be changes. And then you really want to try to have it solidified, in my mind, like 6 to 8 weeks before your target event. And then you're using that a couple of times a week, like you said, 2 to 3 times a week at least, to kind of gain some of those gut adaptations that are going to occur by using the products and things that, you're planning on racing with.
Well, and certainly the environment plays a big role, whether it's hot or cold or altitude or not. If you're going up to altitude and you're not used to that, you might find it's different, right? So how might you talk somebody through going to a race at altitude and how that might affect their nutrition and things to keep in mind?
I'm hopeful that their coach is encouraging a training trip.
All right. Yeah.
Because that would be great. Because sometimes, it is a big change. Like there's increased carbohydrate oxidation at higher altitudes. There's increased fluid loss. There's increased electrolyte losses. And then the hard part too, I try to encourage my athletes to do regular fluid loss testing, because that can change throughout a training cycle. The fitter you get, the more fluids you can end up losing every hour, which can then impact, what is your target replenishment strategy? The other tough thing that, I feel like we should have this more researched or more dialed in, but there's, so much debate in the space about like sodium and electrolyte replenishment. And the tough part is too, as you get more heat adapted or fitter, like you become more efficient at resorbing electrolytes and sodium. And that is hard to quantify though for some athletes. Like there are some studies that show, it could be like up to 300 or 400 milligrams per liter that you resorb back into your body. And so that can have a huge impact, but it's like, how do we apply that to an athlete if we don't actually fully know? You probably have to do multiple sodium sweat tests, things like that. But back to the original question for altitude. What I usually have athletes think about is like, if you can't get on a training trip and practice some of these things, then I would be trying to like push them up slightly on their intake of things. Now, slightly meaning, so like a lot of my athletes, I'll have them trying to at least consume 75% of their fluid losses every hour that we measure through fluid loss testing. So I might tell them maybe we want to bump that up to 85%, just slightly, to try and like account for a little bit of that increased losses at altitude. Might need a little bit more sodium, or like if we're at 60 grams of carbs an hour, maybe we try to train them to get to 70 or 75 an hour in their training and prepare for increased carbohydrate oxidation. The hard part is like, for any of this stuff, if you are going out and doing a 100-miler, you can have the perfect fueling plan dialed out in practice, and then things go haywire halfway through. And it's like, it's hard to fully predict on race day how things are going to go. But then that is where we come up with alternative plans.
Okay.
Like, what would you do in this situation? What would you do if you got sweet fatigue and you couldn't consume that high carb drink mix? So what are you going to do in that situation to get in your fluids, your calories, your carbohydrates? And we come up with alternative plans. And so I think that's actually a really important thing that athletes tend to forget about. They're like, oh, I got this fueling plan. That's what I'm doing.
Right.
But then it's like, okay, well, what is the backup? Or, maybe you have an A plan, B plan, C plan. Okay, what are the, these B and C plans? When would you go to those plans? And so, I'm helping athletes do that sort of thing too, and figuring out what's going to happen in these situations. So hopefully that helps. That's kind of how I think about it with people, because if they can't get to altitude, it's like there's not a ton that you can do in the nutrition front to practice except pushing up slightly in the training plan.
Yeah,
or fueling.
and actually having a backup plan actually just gets that conversation going, which then allows the athlete in their own head during the race to say, aha, I see some red flags. This might be occurring. In order to stay on plan A, I should back off my intensity, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't get to plan B, right? It's not just plan A no matter what. So, I imagine like going to a plan B might be around nausea. Like that has to be one of the biggest. I mean, I've certainly dealt with that myself in the past. Knock on wood, I don't have that coming up in my races here. But yeah, how do you work with somebody that has, this nauseous kind of feel that they've consistently have in their races? What things might you discuss with them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is doing some of the sodium sweat testing, fluid loss testing. Biggest issue that I found is people don't do that, and then they don't realize, that this imbalance in fluid electrolytes is actually what could be causing my nausea issues. So that's one thing. And then I do like to make sure, like, sometimes having a lot of in a longer race, having a lot of gels, chews, and drink mix can cause people to just feel like really kind of sick or nauseous.
Yeah.
So sometimes we will talk about how can we incorporate a little bit of solid food. Maybe that's a good option. Maybe not. But again, like, these are the things that we want to consider. If you're already nauseous in a race, I think one of the worst things that you can do is not consume anything. Because that's going to be tough, because that can perpetuate an issue that's already occurring. So there's a lot of different, like, you kind of have to maybe troubleshoot a little bit in the moment of, maybe I just go to water and a little bit of electrolyte. And then sometimes people have the little like Cliff Blocks or something, and they'll just have one in their mouth and just like suck on that. Or like you take a little bit of a break from like taking in a bunch of sweet things. Just again, coming up with a number of different scenarios that you can try. Like you said, the intensity piece sometimes is a challenge too. Like, you might have to back down on the intensity a little bit to get things like under control before you go again. And then there's always the puke and rally. Like, I hate to say it, but like, some of my athletes have done that, and they feel like phenomenal after they do that. It's like a reset for the system. I know it's hard to think about, but again, it's just like, we try to plan for the best, and occasionally, things are going to happen, and we gotta know what to do in those situations and how to adapt.
Yeah, you mentioned possibly bringing in real food, but what's your thoughts on the real food versus the gels, the bars, etc.? And at what time frame? Is it under 3 hours? Awesome. If it's over 3 hours, let's bring in some real food, banana or whatever it might be. Like, any kind of rule of thumb around like time wise?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, we got to look at intensity of activity. Like, for somebody running a marathon, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be doing a lot of solid foods during a marathon. And so, that cutoff time is a little bit difficult to kind of categorize. But yeah, like, I will say, to your point, 3 hours is probably where like I start thinking about, when someone's going longer than 3 hours, maybe we think about incorporation of solid foods. But on the other hand, I actually have had athletes, like I had somebody do the Vermont 100 miler recently and got second, and he did entirely precision fuel and gels the entire time. We had food options that he tested, but he didn't want them. He felt phenomenal in just doing that the entire 100 miler. So it's like, I think it is very personalized in the person. I've also had like other friends do 100 milers with just gels and hydration mix, but to me, I would probably want to try to incorporate some solids, around that 3-hour mark. And then I kind of think about with the person, do we want to do a little bit of a solid every other hour to give your system a little breakup of, the gels and hydration mix. So a lot of my people are not doing solids every hour to the point, like they'll do it to kind of break things up, but it won't be an every hour thing. It might be every other hour, every couple of hours, they'll take in something solid. And I actually worked with, I was talking with a triathlete the other day, like a higher level triathlete, and she did like Placid, and she was like, I am trying to incorporate these Martin bars in my fueling plan, but on the bike, but I just feel like they're so dry and I can't like chew them in the middle of the bike. And so we talked about, trying a different, like there are other options out there. You don't have to use Martin bars. But she wants it to be practical and quick to open because she's, trying to save time and doesn't want to have to carry a bunch of stuff. So, we're trying a different kind of bar and seeing if that works. So, I think everyone has got to be in tune with, their preferences and how they felt in the past and like all that kind of stuff. So when an athlete's testing a fueling plan, I always like for them to think about, okay, what does my energy look like? How does my stomach feel? What practicality wise does this work for me or not? Like one person might use a pizza slice, but another person's like, heck no, I'm not using that. So so I think that's like the beauty of it though. It's like you have the ability to have those conversations with either a coach or a dietitian, et cetera. And then you can kind of figure out through training with these different things, what makes the most sense for you.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, setting up that process so it's repeatable and you get more and more confidence from it. This is a crazy story, but I knew like a professional runner and he actually raced really well with like Pizza Hut the night before. And when he traveled to Japan or Belgium or anywhere, like Pizza Hut is everywhere and it's always the same. Like he could just rely on it. And in every hotel, he could order Pizza Hut. So that worked for him. So there's crazy stuff, but like, what can you rely upon and get that confidence level? And like for me, if it, I love Pop-Tarts and Fig Newtons, and so and bananas. So when I venture out of the gel realm, that's the type of stuff I will bring in. And I've been doing that since I was 12 years old. Like they've been with me, for decades. So, trying to experiment. You mentioned like about half of your clients are more on the eating disorder side of things. So I certainly want to cover off that area. It's not always recognizable. Certainly a lot of coaches are listening. And, I think it's really important for coaches to actually be aware of, red S, right? So what are some type of things that might lead a coach to think like, hey, I need to reach out for more expert advice here for this athlete because I believe there may be an underlying issue going on. Help walk coaches through how to recognize some of these symptoms and how to take things from there.
Yeah. And just, as a lot of coaches, I think are becoming more aware of what red S is, but essentially someone is not fueling enough over a period of time to support the level of training that they're doing. And then what happens is then your body's systems start kind of like dimming the lights on the system so they don't function well or properly. And that can honestly look different in different athletes, which makes it difficult because, some people might have all these GI issues and then somebody else might have like heart palpitations or weird heart rate stuff, or they might have thyroid issues, and it could look like another health condition is the thing. Like it's oftentimes mistaken for, there's something else wrong with me, and like I would say the GI stuff is the best example I have of that, because a lot of athletes will go to a GI doc because they have to stop a million times and go to the bathroom during their training. And they're like, I don't know why this is occurring. And then they like go through a colonoscopy and an endoscopy and all of this testing, only to be like, the doctor's like, I don't know, like it's like runner's trots or something, runner's diarrhea. And it's like, actually, the system's not functioning right because somebody is not giving it the right amount of fuel. And then there's always in our, those that get a period or are supposed to get a period, like that's a big indicator, like, is not getting a regular period. Some coaches, aren't familiar with the menstrual cycle habits of their athlete, but I actually think it's a conversation that's really important for coaches to be having with athletes, because it's such a big indicator,
right?
Is that is not normal for somebody to not be getting a period. And then the tough part is if an athlete is on birth control, it makes it more difficult. And so in those athletes, will oftentimes not figure it out until like they're getting repeated stress fractures. Or some athletes too, it's like this extreme fatigue situation, like they're just not adapting to their training and like there's this weird health issues going on. But then it turns out, like they're just not fueling enough and it's kind of catching up to them. And so the hard part about Red S is actually recognizing that it is Red S and not something else.
Right.
And so I think that, just being aware and kind of educating yourself on like, how does this affect different systems of the body? What are some, and I just gave a few like examples of things that could be happening with an athlete that might have Red S. And then kind of, might go from there, like asking the hard questions about fueling to the athlete. I think Red S is a situation, though, where I do advocate for an athlete to get professional help to try and get themselves out of that situation, because that's the part that people get confused about. Like, they don't understand that you actually need to eat more than what your predicted energy needs are to get yourself out of a state of Red S, because the body is like in this like state where it's like does not feel safe. And so in order to kind of like think about it as jump starting a car, to jump start, you got to give it extra. You got to give it extra juice, extra fuel. And that part is really, really difficult for athletes to like buy into and understand. And just like having a coach say, eat more, I find actually like can be a little troublesome. Like it can actually make things worse for people, because if they eat more, then they gain weight and then they get like stressed that they're still not feeling well, then it can turn into like maybe a not so great situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's such, again, like being the therapist, it's such a big role that you play, like trying to uncover those underlying reasons why, and then starting from ground zero, right? And building back up and building, I guess, educating the athlete in terms of why has to be a large part of changing that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, so for some athletes, so it can occur unintentionally, like if an athlete doesn't understand that how much they actually need to fuel their training and adapt to training, that's an unintentional underfueling Red S situation. But intentional would be more from the like weight loss standpoint, or the eating disorder standpoint and the intentional restriction of food. And so you kind of have to consider what is the situation here, and then how to best support that person. So if it is like an eating disorder a true eating disorder situation, then I'm going to get a therapist on board too, like an actual therapist, because I'm not a therapist. So like having that team is really important in that process. If it's a person that is unintentionally in that situation and they're on board to just go all in, for me, those are the easy athletes that I can just really help, like understand and then they do it, and then they get back to operation, and then they keep going,
Yeah.
But that's more, I would say that's a little bit more rare for people to like be that bought into the whole recovery from red situation. It's more common to have the other two things, like the weight loss piece and then the eating disorder piece as the underlying situation.
Well, yeah, and it's got to be exciting to see someone actually get stronger. And
oh yeah,
even though then they're putting on muscle, so this is body weight, but power to weight ratio isn't always just cut and dry, right? Like building muscle recovery helps you go faster. So that's got to be really, really exciting to see those improvements. So how can, don't you have a new podcast out? Didn't I hear about this?
Oh yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's great. My colleague Zoë Rom and I are doing a podcast called Your Diet Sucks, actually.
Okay. You're speaking right to me. No.
Yeah. So we're trying to create a more unique podcast experience where we're kind of looking at the history behind certain diet culture ideas.
Okay.
And the reasons why athletes maybe grasp onto certain ideas and have that nuanced conversation about those things. So for instance, our episode that came out today is on alcohol.
Okay.
And so we're looking at the history behind alcohol and why people drink, and then why is it so ingrained into maybe endurance sports and celebration at the finish line, and looking at both sides. So it's not a like you can't drink episode, but it's actually exploring like what does this look like for people? Why are some people feeling like pressured to do it? Why are more people maybe not drinking as much? And so having those really awesome conversations. And then we look at a lot of research behind the topics that we're talking about too. So I'm really excited to be involved with the project and the podcast with Zoe. She is a big media guru, so we're working together on making something great.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm definitely digging these new non-alcoholic beers, etc. But I do have to say, I tried over the weekend an NA gin, and it was so horrible. I couldn't believe they were selling it.
Some of those are questionable. I'm like, this tastes a little bit like battery acid. I know, that's exactly what is in this.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's weird. They do taste a little. Some of them taste a little weird, but I will say, like, some of the mocktails that I've had, like as mixed drinks at a restaurant, have been amazing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun to explore. But I'm with you on some of those canned things or whatever. Some of them are not very good. Yeah. But Your Diet Sucks. Listen in. Would love for you to listen to it, Dirk, if you haven't tuned in yet.
For sure. And how about and your website? What, flynutrition.com, I take it?
Flynutrition.org, actually.
All right.
So tune in if anyone needs, like, I put on classes, I have a membership, and then I do one-on-one coaching with people. I do single fueling plan sessions if you just need to work on race fueling, or like a longer term 3-month, the more in-depth, like we were just talking about in the podcast earlier.
Yeah. And also, I mean, encourage coaches to reach out to you as well, just to learn more about your services. So when they see opportunity as well, be nice.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's great. I've been, I've integrated into more TrainingPeaks accounts, just like requesting access to an athlete's TrainingPeaks.
Yeah.
And so being part of that process has been really great. Just being able to communicate with athlete, coach, etc. So again, I like to do that team approach to my nutrition work.
Yeah, we were on a panel a month or so ago where we talked about surrounding the athlete with a team of experts. You might have the strength coach, nutritionist, even sports psychologist. There's now teams that have sleep experts as part of the performance
Yeah, that's
team.
awesome.
And certain coaches have said, "Hey, me alone as a coach can maybe improve this athlete by 0.5% or 1%. But if I add in a strength coach, a nutrition coach, we might be able to get 2 or 3% improvement." So don't feel it's just on you, and so some athletes really can benefit a lot from some other expertise, and working in harmony together holistically is definitely something we're seeing growing. So thanks for mentioning that capability to share athletes amongst other coaches and work as a team. Thanks again, Kylee, for joining me today, and look forward to listening to your podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.